as a lot of young mothers do, I was trying to be Superwoman. So I was trying to do everything all at the same time. I think I felt very guilty the whole time that I wasn't giving enough to every part of my life, so that I wasn't spending enough time. I used to count the hours. I used to keep the children awake so that I could make sure that I spent more hours with them than the nanny did, kind of thing. I was barely speaking to my husband. I wasn't seeing friends. When I phoned my parents, my father would say, "Hello, stranger." And I was advised by somebody to consider meditation. And so I started it then, and I meditate still now every morning. And I would recommend that to anybody. If you really can't find 10 minutes for yourself in the day, then you've got a world of problems. Hello, I'm Sue Unerman. I'm Chief Transformation Officer at EssenceMediacom.
Early studies took this guest to Oxford studying history. Who would know decades later she would bring light to an area shrouded in many mystery. Falling in love with media, she had a passion to get into work, navigating the industry as a self-confessed introvert. Within her career, she spent many years within strategy, to flourishing as an author, producing inclusion-based apathy. So for now, for many people that enter their careers, whether short or whether long, we hope that through the knowledge of Sue Unerman, they'll find a place that they belong.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
That's lovely. And that was a good surprise. Thank you.
Well, I think that says a lot about what you've achieved in your life, so you're Chief Transformation Officer at Mediacom in the UK, which, to give some context for anybody who may not know, this is a company with 1,400 staff across 5 different offices.
Yep.
And part of a global network of Mediacom, which is up to nearly 8,000 staff, 100 countries, 125 offices. This is a big organization.
And we've just got bigger, as we were talking about.
Yes, please share.
My boss, Nick Lawson, announced that we had merged with a sister agency, Essence. So we are going to be, from 2023, EssenceMediacom, which makes us an even bigger company globally.
I think that will be around 10,000 staff then.
Wow.
Which is incredible. And in the UK, Mediacom, not a small outfit on its own, at 1.4 billion in billings.
It's actually, so our turnover is more than 2 billion, because obviously so much of it doesn't get counted. And I'm proud of that, because the company that I've joined, and we'll probably come on to say I've been at the company a ridiculously long amount of time, but the company I joined in 1990, which was the root of the company today, our billings were 44 million. So we've gone from 44 million to 2 billion. And obviously media's changed a lot, my job's changed a lot. But by holding true, I think, to a lot of the principles that fueled our growth in the 90s, we are continuing to grow.
That is incredible.
I'm proud of that. Proud of being part of that team.
I'm sure. And so how long have you been with the company since that?
So since 1990, I joined a media independent called The Media Business, which media independents were the exception rather than the rule in the 1990s. Media was part of the full service agency offering, so that they were locked into the creative agencies. And I went to my first media independent in 1990. I'd had some jobs in full service agencies before that, and I went to help set up the strategy department. And that is what I think unlocked growth, was bringing strategy into the media agencies and the media independents, which meant that we were then giving independent advice about how clients should spend their advertising money in order to grow their business.
So clients include Sky, Tesco, Adidas, Google. You've won over 30 Cannes Media Lions awards in the last 10 years and awarded Agency of the Decade, I think two decades running.
2 decades, an unprecedented 2 decades in a row, aiming for the third. Yeah.
And you were there for all of those 2 decades.
Yeah.
And not only that, you've raised 2 children, 2 young women now, and co-author of 3 books. Financial Times named you in their Heroes list, Champions of Women in Business, Yahoo, Outstanding Heroes in Business, and The Drum's 25 Women Who Have Shaped the Digital Industry. Quite a few accolades there. So we're going to unpack the story. The real question today is, how do you become Chief Transformation offers such a large and well-respected company. So taking it back to the early days, you shared that you had an older brother who's 9 years older than you, and an older sister who is 11 years older than you. And you said you think that growing up as a little girl, that you thought they were your contemporaries. And that maybe shaped not a normal understanding of hierarchy. What do you remember that makes you say that you thought they were your contemporaries growing up?
So I think I have I'm not great with hierarchy, and that's got drawbacks in a couple of ways. First of all, if people like hierarchy, then they don't necessarily like, in my more junior days, didn't really necessarily like me around because I was a bit kind of blind to it. But I actually acknowledge and recognize now that I have all this status that you've just been talking about, which, as you say it, it's like, God, that sounds good. Who's that?
That's you, Sue.
I don't even really I don't walk around thinking I am that person, that chief, that person that's achieved these things.
Do you think that's healthy? Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think it's?
I think it's got, like a lot of things, it's got pros and cons, because it does mean that I will tend to focus on the job in hand. So if we imagine a car needing its tire changing, I'll be out the back, seeing if there's a spare tire. It's a bad analogy these days because so few new cars have tires. But anyway, back to the days when they did. I'll be out the back, kind of going, how do we get this kind of jacked up or whatever, cranked up, to change the tire. And that's very useful to have around, to have somebody who's got expertise and experience involved in that. But equally, of course, it can be a bit annoying. And I would say when I was more junior, it was, again, very valuable to have somebody who was willing to get their hands dirty and roll their sleeves up. But there might have been more senior people around me who thought, hang on a second, she should wait to be asked. And whether this is true or not, I can date it back to a very specific occasion, because I still remember being quite shocked by it. And it's not a sob story about my childhood, it's a very comfortable middle class upbringing. But I remember one particular occasion when we were sitting and having quite a formal, my dad liked formal dinners, and we were sitting having quite a formal dinner. And my sister must have been about 16, which would have made me about 5. And my brother actually was away at school. And my father and my sister were having this very intense conversation about something. And I wanted to join in with it. And I really felt as though my opinion was being disrespected. And this left me, first of all, it was just quite a impactful moment. But secondly, it left me with a real desire to want to hear everybody's voices, but for everybody's voice to be heard. But probably also as well, including my own, which sometimes maybe my voice is too loud. So I have to acknowledge that.
And you're 5 years old at this time?
Yeah.
Wow, what a thinking process to go through at 5 years old. I'm not sure how many 5-year-olds are thinking, oh, why is my opinion not being heard here? Do you think that's unique?
If it is, I'm surprised, because it hasn't ever occurred to me that that's unique. My experience of children of that age through my own daughters is that the children of that age are surprisingly opinionated. I remember talking the other day to somebody who was a relatively new parent who was astonished that her 3-year-old daughter had very strong opinions about what she was going to wear that day, because she had in her head the idea that she was still getting to choose it. And certainly I know that my daughters went through a phase when they were still at kindergarten where they would only wear either a Spider-Man outfit or a Batman and Robin outfit, respectively, or a Superman outfit every day.
Wow.
So
superheroes.
Superheroes. So no, I don't think it's unique. I think that those opinions are going on. Are those toddlers being listened to?
Well, I think what is unique is that you still remember it to this day, and
obviously
it was an impactful
really
moment
Yeah.
for you. I think that's really interesting, and maybe let's see how that maybe manifests itself later in your career. And just paint a picture for us. What was life like growing up for you?
So I think my brother was away at school a lot. my sister, as I say, was 11 years older than me. So, I mean, when she was 13 and going through all the things that 13-year-olds will go through, I was 2. I mean, it's a different generation. And I think that probably, it was a slight, it disrupted the balance of the family. They were already a family of 4, and then I came along. What it did mean is that I was into music very, very early. So my birth coincided with the explosion of popular culture and the Beatles.
Okay,
And
Beatlemania.
I remember really clearly, and I still have the 45s, that I would go with my dad every Saturday. He would go and get coffee beans from a shop in Golders Green. We lived in Mill Hill. And because my dad worked full time, I was usually in bed by the time he came home. That was my time when I would see him, and I would go with him. And there was a Woolworths, which nobody young will remember what a Woolworths is.
I remember Woolworths.
Yeah. For those that do, there was a Woolworths over the road, and we would go to the Woolworths, and I would either get a Beatles single or a treat or a book. So I've got a lot of Just William books that date back to those days as well, that I still have and I still treasure. I'm not a hoarder. I just keep some things. And from the age of 1, 2, 3, 4, that's what I did. Was I went and I listened to music, and that I found to be quite unusual. So I've spoken to contemporaries of mine who go, I can't believe you were in the Beatles. You were into the Beatles. You were way too young at that age. It's like, no, I think that was my deep rooted, that sense that music is your friend and music is saving your life. That's where it started, I think.
Wow. What impact did it have on you as a child, feeling like this unit was already there and then you came along?
I think I understand about exclusion. And, I have written books, as you've said, about inclusion and belonging. And
so is that what you felt at the time? You felt excluded?
I don't want to go, oh, it was all awful and I felt like I was excluded. I just think there were a bunch of quite adult people and then a small child. And I think that there were probably quite a lot of things that I didn't get. So I can remember as well that, the family as a whole used to love to go to the Chinese restaurant on Mill Hill Broadway, which was there for years and years and years. It may even still be there. And I always used to be a bit sick afterwards because I was only little, and so I think there was just a lot of those things where there was a vibe going on. And I just think perhaps it's made me conscious of the fact that, and I've said this before, getting the joiners in to join in a workplace culture, that's the easy thing to do, right? Getting the people who go, yay, jazz hands, let's all do this. That's well done you if you've got the joiners in to join in, but that's only a part of it. Making sure that everybody in the organization feels like they're really included, feels like they belong, that's another challenge again. One of the interesting things about families and society at large is that those things in the family stay set in stone for a very long time. So I can remember having spoken to therapists in the past who go, it's extraordinary how, an older brother will always treat a younger sister in a certain way, even when that younger sister is, 50 years old. It's like she's still the baby sister. But also, I do think there's something in how it leads you to behave as an adult and in the workplace. So I would say that as a younger child, probably my impulse to shake up the status quo, poke a stick at things, again, maybe that, disrespect for hierarchy, which could either be a healthy thing or not a healthy thing, depending on who's on the other side of it. I think all of those things come from being a younger child. Whereas I think that those leaders who are elder children, they very often have a sense that everything must be sorted out for everybody, and, all of the clearing up must be done. That's that kind of thing. And have we made sure that everybody in the room has, got a sandwich at tea time? And I think you get different sorts of traits from those different statuses. And then, middle children are often famous for being the people who are good at negotiating and keeping peace. So,
Great.
Yeah.
So moving on to education.
Yeah.
Academically, you must have done well because you studied history at Oxford.
Yeah.
Not an easy university to get into.
No.
How was your experience at school?
So this is one of my things, and I've thought about this because my other big motivator behind writing all the books, so Tell the Truth and The Glass Wall and Belonging, is about technique. And I think so many of us think that we can't do things. So you might think, oh, I'm not creative, or you might think, oh, I can't do X, Y, and Z. And all they're lacking is technique. And this definitely comes from school. So when I entered senior school, I admit to finding it, I went from quite a small school, so a school where there was 30 in the year, to a school where there was like 100 in the year. So not a huge school, but, a different size of things. And I found it quite bewildering. And it also happened to be in a building. It was a state school, it was grammar school, but it was in a building that was sort of a composite of two buildings, which meant that it had that thing whereby you might be on the third floor at one end of the corridor, but you find yourself on the fourth floor at the other end of the corridor. And I can remember as a child being really bewildered by, these hordes of girls and young women going up and down staircases, and almost that the staircases moved in the way that I then saw on the Harry Potter films. So it's like that was my sense as an 11-year-old starting school. And there was this thing whereby the first 2 years of senior school, if you got 3 A's in a row for your work, or 6 A minuses in a row for your work, then you would get a good work mark. And if you got a good work mark, you would get your name read out in assembly at the end of the half term and at the end of term. And so there was these 6 occasions to have your name read out. And I never got a good work mark. And my best friend that I sat next to at the time, she would get them like most weeks. My friend would, every week she'd say, I'm going to get my good work mark signed up. In the headmistress's office, are you coming? And every week I'd be going, I haven't got to need this. I haven't got to need this week. And anyway, I used to sit there in assembly and I used to think maybe they'll read out my name by mistake. And of course they never did. But I would like be holding my breath, maybe. Yeah, wishful thinking. And then anyway, me and my friend then fell out over something. I could go into the details because I remember that as well, but I won't now.
Mm-hmm.
She's not here to give the other side of the argument.
Mm-hmm.
And I made friends with a girl called Susan Leong. And Susan looked at the way that I was working, and she had some suggestions for me about my homework. And one of them, which is the one that I remember, seems so obvious now that I don't understand how I couldn't have worked this out myself. But she said, you know how, when you write something in your homework book, you're underlining the headline and you're using a red pen to underline the headline? And I said, yes. And she said, well, if you used a ruler to do the underlining, it would be much neater. And she said, that might lift your marks up from, say, a B+ to an A-.
Okay.
And literally, this had never occurred to me. So I had a ruler. I was not using to underline. That's new technology. That was new technology for me. That was applying new technology. That was new data and new technology. And I did this, and I did some other things as well. And my work significantly improved. And then I did, do well in exams. I was the only girl in my year to get into Oxford 4th term as well. At which point the headmistress did read my name out in assembly, but she pronounced it wrongly.
Oh no! After all that
so
time,
my moment,
waiting for this moment.
But I didn't really care by that point because I was just glad that I'd achieved. And I would say that really gave me this strong sense that, and the books are full of techniques that often, if you're sitting and you're looking at a blank sheet of paper and you're thinking, what do I do now? Or you're faced with a problem, there will be a technique out there that other people know about. Just ask them, or of course read the books. Available at all good bookshops.
And you've shared with us before that you're an introvert.
Yes.
And how was it being an introvert at school? You said you used to, when other people were out playing at lunchtime, you'd be in the library.
This was another reason that I did well academically, was that I didn't really fit teenage culture at all. I was very geeky. I was surprisingly geeky, I'd say. I mean, I don't know many children of that age that sort of teach themselves ancient Greek. which I did at the age of kind of 10 or 11. It is quite a geeky thing.
Where did that idea even come from?
Well, I found the book on the shelf.
Okay.
And I'd been reading Greek myths, and I think my sister had been telling me Greek myths, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to read it in the original, which I then went on to do.
As all 10-year-olds do. What a natural thought.
I did study it at school as well later on.
Yeah.
But so I did also prefer, I suppose, the studying to the networking, and that helped me academically as well. And I think, for people who are considering career paths as well, there are two routes to the top. The routes overlap. You can't just do 100% of one and none of another one. But essentially, at a certain point in your career, you can decide whether you're going to put the emphasis and your energy on networking, which is one way to get promoted, or whether you're going to put the emphasis and the energy on the techniques and the tasks in front of you and pushing the work further. And the two overlap, but it's a bit like, I think, the Binet-Field 60-40 or 70-30 rule. You can focus on one and do a bit of the other one, and both routes are a route to success.
That's really interesting. So I think from other people we've spoken to, others have gone more the networking route. And
it's a popular route.
Yes, and Sam Hawkey, CEO at AMV, described what he did as slipstreaming. So he built relationships with people who were really doing well and going up fast.
Yeah.
And kind of paved the way for him. Not that he didn't have great talent and skill as well, but as you said, there's a bit of a blend and probably more networking than like studying the techniques, which is fascinating. So we'll dive into how you apply techniques to get to where you are. Did it ever feel lonely at school?
Of course it did. Yeah, I think introverts are lonely, and I think as a teenager it felt extremely lonely because I didn't have the experience and the understanding, and also I didn't have the network of people that I then got when I went to university. Because obviously I wasn't in this. If I was extremely geeky in my year at school, I was not extremely geeky when I arrived at university. I was, on the non-geeky side of things. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, there's just very, very geeky people that go to Oxford.
I see.
That's essentially how it. I mean, I remember a speech that I once heard one of the tutors make about how to get in. And she literally, at one of the colleges, and my old college, Mansfield College, and she literally gave this sort of speech about, if you've been doing all the things that the school suggests for you, if you've been, doing charity events and, being involved in social things and being involved in sports. And she said, we're very pleased for you, but that's not what we want here. Well, what we want here are the people that go to the library instead. And essentially, and probably born out of the introversion, that's what I was doing. And I kind of went, okay, now this makes sense to me. But when I arrived there, I'd got out of the library some of the time. The place is full of people who don't leave the library. Oh, and public school people. But that's another thing.
And going back to that period of time, especially at university, what would you say is your favourite period of history and why?
Oh, what a question. I am not going to answer that because I think history is endlessly fascinating, and I still subscribe to History Today because it's a brilliant magazine, and there will be aspects of stuff from all kinds of periods that I find really interesting. And I think the feminist reinterpretation of history, world religions is long overdue and really fascinating. For example, and did you know this? They used to think that there weren't women warriors in prehistory. And the reason is that if they found graves that had weapons in them, they automatically assumed that the bodies were men and that they might just be smaller men, but, that their bodies were men. And latest DNA techniques have proved, in fact, that there were a lot of women warriors of that period. So it's a whole different take on the history of the world. Having said that, there are bits of history that I find less compelling than others. And that may be because at school we did an awful lot on the Victorian Corn Laws, which is not a period of history I've gone back to. But you know, I loved one of my special papers was about monasteries in the 13th century, which is fascinating. But another one of them was on British foreign policy and cabinet documents 1935 to 39. So I think it's about what's in there and what you uncover. And I do think if you like history, you're a bit of a detective.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I love what you said there about that kind of bringing the feminine back into history.
Yeah.
Because there's many things that it could just be one person that just says, oh, they're men. And that blocks off a whole area of interesting and fascinating like subject matter around, you know, females in history and female warriors in history, which is a very interesting area.
But it's also, I mean, the other, and there is an analogy with the job that I do now, which is interpretation of data. So I think we're all in the business now of interpreting data, and you have to interrogate it. You know, it's one person's, you know, story from data. That doesn't make it the truth that's in the data. You need to, that thing of poking it with a stick again and asking questions.
Most definitely.
So you start working very young. You had your first job at 14 years old.
Yes.
Working in a shoe shop.
Yes.
And in terms of the world of advertising, you've said that you sort of fell into advertising, working as originally a TV time buyer in the 80s. How did that come about?
So I was going to do a law conversion course, and then I was waiting for it to start. I had a place at the Inner Temple, and I, to be honest, got fed up of not having any money, so I just randomly applied for jobs. My brother actually spotted the job as a TV time buyer at Benton and Bowles, and I went along for the interview. You know, it was a number of interviews. I had an interview for a city job. I had an interview for a job in computing. I had an interview in a retail job, and I could have, you know, I got offered a couple of them. You know, the one in advertising was the one that I picked.
Why did you pick that one?
Well, because I didn't want to take the one in retail, because although it was a really interesting job, it was a fast track job. It meant that you had to spend 2 months working in a shopping centre. And I felt like I'd done that.
You've
because
done all that since 14.
I'd done that since I was 14. So you know, 2 months felt like a long time at that age.
You're 21 at this point, I guess.
Yeah. So I didn't want to go back to doing that. And so the next job that I got offered was this one in advertising. I didn't know anything about media. I mean, I think even now, when somebody asks me what job do I do, I'll usually say I work in advertising first of all. And then they will immediately go, so you make the ads that are on the telly. And then I go, no, that's the kind of the only bit that we don't do. We do make content, but it tends not to be the 30-second ads. And what we largely do is, you know, and I explain media, and people go, so is that advertising? Because if you say you work in media, then people think that you're a journalist.
Yes.
So
for those who don't know, watching or listening,
what media is?
What is media in a summary?
We advise clients on how to achieve their growth objectives by investing money in a range of media channels, and also on the kind of content and the creative that will make the most of that investment by media channel. And we also, through our division Creative Systems, execute that content. So that might be, for example, and I'm very proud of this because we did this last year and it was a huge success. We brought back the show Changing Rooms, but it's an advertiser funded program by our client Dulux. So rather than just say you should put some posters up, we actually interrogated what would be the most likely thing to unlock behavior change that was ownable by Dulux Paint. And so we brought back Changing Rooms and reincarnated Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen's career.
Right.
In his
so it's not
trousers.
Just, okay, let's make you a 30-second ad that goes in between a TV show. No, actually, let's do a whole TV show.
Yep.
By January 2000, you get the role of head of strategic planning at Mediacom.
Yeah.
And you said that you're an introvert, don't like the networking side so much. And how did you get to that senior position without maybe having a strength in networking or doing so much of it that others maybe feel you need to?
This is going to, I don't know how to say this without it sounding super arrogant, but I'm really good at the work. I'm really good at what I do, and I love making the work better. And one of the things that motivates me is actually unfulfilled potential. And that could be unfulfilled potential in anybody, hence the glass wall book and the belonging book, to make sure people's careers aren't blocked by, the wrong limits.
Yeah.
But it's also the potential in the work. And I just find that fascinating. And so that's what that's the role that I took on was.
What was the road to becoming?
Okay, I can tell you specifically.
Yeah.
So I started, as I say, to help set up the strategy department at the media business, and we then grew and grew and grew. And
were you quite early in your career to be setting up a whole strategy?
It wasn't me on my own. So that I helped to. I was part of the team. So I joined as an associate director at that point to help and set up the strategy team.
Right.
And then I moved from that to being actually asked by my then CEO in the UK, Stephen Allen, who is, a no longer works at WPP, but he's a brilliant boss. And I would challenge you to find anybody, and he might be a good person for this show, actually. I would challenge you to find anybody who doesn't find him inspirational to work with. Mm-hmm. And Steve, I was actually on maternity leave with my daughter, and I got a phone call from Steve, and he said, "I'm thinking of appointing a head of planning. Do you know anybody who would be any good at the job?"
And what was your role at this point?
I was running a set of accounts. So I was running a set of accounts. And I thought about this question, and again, I didn't let the question limit me, because you hear what he said, and I could have thought, well, he's asking me who else could be good at this job. He's not offering me a job. But I decided that I wasn't going to hear that I was going to hear the question as a completely neutral question. And so my response was, yes, I know somebody who'd be really good at that, and that would be me. And I went back with a plan of how I thought we should do it, which was to set up a planning brand, which at the time was called Real World Planning, so planning that works in the real world. And it had 3 principles. And he and I talked about this, and he said to me, if you do this, Sue, you have to commit to it. And I said, okay, then I think I need to come off all the accounts, because I need to be on all of the accounts.
Yeah. And what, for those who don't know, what does it mean to be on accounts?
So I was responsible to the board of the company for the retention and the client satisfaction of a set of accounts that, for example, included Direct Line, motor insurance. What else I worked on at the time? There were some other accounts as well. And so I had a team working for me, and I was the sort of head of those accounts.
Right. So you're responsible for them staying on as a client, and super happy as a client.
And that they're growing as a business. And I said, I think you should take me off those accounts, because I need to be across everything, which was because a lot of people see safety in those accounts.
Yeah.
So if the client loves you, then that's your safety. And I just thought, unless I'm a step removed from client service, I'm not going to be as good at driving the planning output. So let me unpick that a bit. When you're running a set of accounts, when you're responsible for client satisfaction, you tend to have experience of what they will like and what they won't like. And you almost, and I think this happens in all sorts of sectors, all sorts of, especially advertising across the board. So you won't take an idea that's too far out the box to the client, because you know already that the client won't appreciate it. So you almost are self-limiting yourself. You're kind of, how far can you push the idea if you know that particular person at that client, who's the person you've got to sell it to, isn't going to buy it?
Yeah.
So what I thought was important was that I was a step removed from that, so that I could think really clearly and independently about what the ideas were. And that was the team we set up, with a very small team. First, it was just me, and then Matt Mee, who's now our global chief strategy officer. He was my number 2, and then the team expanded, and it still exists today. It's run by the current chief strategy officer in the UK, but there's a global team which Matt runs.
Wow.
And they sit outside the accounts to an extent so that they can think independently about them in respect of business outcomes, but also in terms of the ultimate client's consumer target market.
And is that from your decision at that point, starting it, going, I think I need to come off these accounts and this be a separate thing?
Yeah.
How interesting it's, still going in that
Well, I think it's been
today.
a successful model is why, I mean, I expect I had other ideas as well that weren't I'm not going to mention that weren't so successful.
Can you think of any kind of early successes through taking that perspective out and then working on accounts that you can remember were really notable?
Well, my role then became helping other people to think of ideas. So I would always give ownership of those ideas to other people, but I think encouraging that kind of impact led us to work that was recognised by the industry. And perhaps one of the an example that comes to mind, which was in collaboration with AMV, who also were responsible for this, and the strategist on the account then, a guy called Matt, who came up with the idea for an anti-gun crime campaign to do a collaboration with a grime band, Roll Deep, and issued a single which was just incredibly successful and delivered the message about anti-gun crime rather better than an ad featuring a policeman. So again, it's like that stepping away from what the traditional answer is or the heritage answer is.
So Ash was a grime MC. Do you know the song, Ash?
Song?
Yeah, so I remember something around that.
Yeah.
Like thinking about, I'm going to check it out after this.
Yeah.
You described yourself when we spoke before as someone who was ambitious about their career and didn't want to let people down with work. So you're in a position now where you're raising 2 young girls.
Yeah.
And your boss comes and says to you that he thinks that you should work a 4-day week.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What was your response to that? How did it kind of make you feel that moment in your career?
So the first thing that I said to him was, are you trying to get rid of me? Are you saying I'm not doing my job properly? And he said, and the thing about Steve is Steve does tell you the truth. And he's not the only boss that I've worked with that tells the truth, but as someone who's written a book called Tell the Truth, I value that and that straight talking. And Steve said, no, he said, I just think you're really, really unhappy. And
were you unhappy?
Yes.
Why?
I was, as a lot of young mothers do, I was trying to be Superwoman. So I was trying to do everything all at the same time.
What was that like? Paint the picture for us of what was going on.
Well, I think it was quite stressful for everybody else. I mean, I was just, I think I felt very guilty the whole time that I wasn't giving enough to every part of my life, so that I wasn't spending enough time. I used to count the hours. I used to keep the children awake so that I could make sure that I spent more hours with them than the nanny did, kind of thing. Because we had a wonderful nanny, I have to say.
So you'd count the hours that you'd spent with them compared to the nanny?
Yeah, to make sure that I the balance was right.
Wow.
I obviously wasn't. I was barely speaking to my husband. He got very short shrift at that time. Although he was a saint, as he always is about it. I wasn't seeing friends. When I phoned my parents, my father would say, "Hello, stranger. Nice of you to call." And then I also felt the whole time like as though was I giving enough to work? Was I giving enough to the clients?
So it seems like in every area you're feeling like you're not giving enough of yourself.
Yeah.
How was that to deal with, like, mentally?
Well, I had a lot of help mentally. So, I will say now, therapy helps with that kind of thing, because I was, there's a great book for anybody who is in the same situation. And I read it at exactly the right time. And it's quite a difficult book to read, But when I read it and I reread it, and it's called Addicted to Perfection by a Jungian therapist called Marion Woodman. And she talks in it about the archetype, and it's not an uncommon archetype, of women who are constantly trying to please, a father who is difficult to please in their head. And that makes them very alpha orientated at work. It makes them try to achieve the impossible the whole time. And it makes them intolerant of things that are messy. And the fact is that life is messy. And when you have small children, literally, it's quite messy,
How did you deal? Were you someone who liked things to be very clean?
I used to be very clear cut about my work-life boundaries. So I would be at work till I was at work, and then I would stop and I would go home, and then it wouldn't be work. And I've never, no, honestly, if I said I was that tidy, people would just laugh that knew me. But I liked to make work as perfect as I could. And I learnt two things during this time, and I wouldn't say necessarily either of them came easily. First of all, was that work-life blend is more important than work-life balance. And just as, because I then moved to a 4-day week, and it worked really well. But just as, even now, if, one of my daughters needed me for something, I would get up and go and help them, whatever it was. And I would expect both my employer and this podcast to be understanding of that. But equally, therefore, if on the day that I wasn't at work, my boss really needed me for something, then okay, yeah, it's acceptable for them to call me and for me to help with it. So it's like you've got to keep boundaries, but they don't need to be watertight.
So is that the difference between work-life balance and a work-life blend?
But for me, yes, is that they do blend into each other, and that's okay within limits, so long as you're not stressed by it. You've got to keep the balance.
So was this what was happening at the time where your boss said, I think you should go to a 4-day week, or what was...
I think my boundaries were too rigid then. And then when I went to the 4-day week, it also, and this is going to sound like, because I'm going to sound like I'm ancient, but it was just as Blackberries and things like that were becoming really available and really useful. And so I would find that I could be going around the supermarket with two small children at 12 noon on my day that I wasn't working, and get an email about something that was supposedly kind of like super, super, super urgent, and just simply find a way of dealing with it and deal with it in a 10-15 minute kind of email exchange, rather than it turning into something that would be a crisis by the time we got to the next working day. And I acknowledging that and accepting that became important. And then the second aspect whereby things changed was that I shifted from wanting to make everything perfect personally to helping people make things better.
Tell us about that.
Being able to make things perfect yourself is a great skill. Helping other people to improve things is a very different skill. And sometimes can be hard, because it means that you are in the role whereby you are critiquing something, and it's very important that the people that you're critiquing feel empowered by that and not just criticized by that. And that's a little bit of a pact that you have to enter into with people. But for me, it was quite liberating. I was working with some brilliant people at the time, and people who were really open to essentially the techniques that I was sharing, because it's not about a judgment, it's very often about a technique. So I've got a blog in campaign, it's also at Unerman.com, and one of the topics that I return to are techniques for creativity, and I've found those to be just super empowering personally. So I've collected them over the years, and we've a number of times we've had the whole company trained in creativity. And the first time that we did it, which was around this time, so early 2000s, and it was a suggestion from my next boss, who's now my global boss, Nick Lawson, who's been a great mentor to me and inspirer of me throughout my career, and one of a number. But, Nick, who actually joined as my assistant, and he was the best person that I've ever, hired from scratch, is now running the company and
Wow.
doing a brilliant job, and has the new role of Mediacom CEO
So you hired him as an assistant,
in 1991. Yeah.
and now he's CEO of the
Yes.
global
Yes.
organization.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he hasn't done badly. That wasn't a
Okay.
bad hire.
No.
And
How does that make you feel?
so proud, so incredibly proud. I'm incredibly proud of him. And, nearly everything that I know about leadership has come from one or two people that I've worked for, and Nick is definitely one of those.
What do you think it is about him that has led to where he's got to?
I think he's a natural leader. And leadership's interesting. So there are techniques for leadership as well. We're getting off techniques for creativity, but techniques for leadership as well. I think, though, when you meet a natural leader, and Nick is a great sportsman, he still, I think, has a cricket team that he plays in. When you meet a natural leader, they have the capacity to hear what's going on, but also to create a vision that is inclusive and that makes everybody want to give everything that they can in order to help achieve it. And he might be another great person for your podcast.
Yeah.
If he has the time, he's quite busy at the moment.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm
can
sure. A
imagine.
few
But
things to do.
so I was back to the creativity technique. So this is, I'm now like head of strategy or whatever the title was at the time. It was head of strategic solutions, I think was what we called it. And Nick said to me, there's these guys called What If. They've got techniques for training people. And what If did at the time was they would take your elite people and train them for 2 weeks and then give them back to you. And supposedly that would supercharge the organization. And I didn't really like this idea. I'm very conscious, and it's maybe back to my childhood again, but I definitely haven't always been in the elite. I definitely haven't always been the person where people have gone, oh, we've got to keep an eye on her. I've just sort of a lot of the time just been there or been outside because I didn't join in with the joining in things. And so I didn't really want to pick an elite. And I said to them how much, I asked for them for a cost for it. And they said it was this cost. And I said, well, what about if instead of that, you did the whole company and you gave them 3 hours training rather than taking 15 people and giving them 2 weeks training? And they went, we can't possibly do that. And I said, no, you can. And I talked them into it. And so we the whole company trained in the 4 what if techniques, which I still use today. And again, for anybody that's sitting and looking at a blank sheet of paper or has been asked to solve a problem, technique.
Love it.
Yeah. What would you say is your most favorite creative techniques that you've learned over the years?
Well, again, it's very difficult to pick a favorite. But revolution is a good one. So this is one of the 4 R's. So I'll go back to the what if techniques. And what you do with revolution, and this is going to chime with some of the other things I've said, I guess, is that you write down all of the rules of the category, and then you write down what would happen if you broke those rules. And I think that's a great technique for coming up with something different. And I was advised by somebody to consider meditation. And so I started it then, and I meditate still now for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the day, every morning. And I would recommend that to anybody. And, people sometimes go, oh, I've tried it, but I wasn't very good at it. It's like, there's no such thing as that. You can't not be good at it. It's kind of like, if you're lying there and you're allowing yourself to feel safe in that moment and to breathe, use breathing techniques, and I like candles. And it's now as common a practice to me as cleaning my teeth. So just as I wouldn't come out without cleaning my teeth, I wouldn't come out without finding those 10, 15 minutes. And I remember saying to somebody, and I've given this advice to other people, I don't know if you guys meditate or... But sometimes people go, I haven't got time. And when I said that to the person that recommended it to me, she said, if you really can't find 10 minutes for yourself in the day, then you've got a world of problems. And that's all you need, right?
It's so true. It really does buy you back time in the day. How much time does it cost you to make a mistake, make an error, make a say the wrong thing, and suddenly you're giving yourselves maybe days of problems because you didn't take that 10-15 minutes to just pause and be present.
My husband is a qualified mindfulness coach, so that's his thing. I plug his book for any Bowie fans and Buddha fans out there. It's called The Tao of Bowie, and it's techniques from David Bowie's experiences with Buddhism to help you live a better life.
Fascinating. Wow. And it's really, I think it's Ariana Huffington who described it in her book that, meditation is like this. If there was a magic pill, like the film Limitless, where he has a pill and sees everything, and if there was one that existed, meditation would be that. It just can transform so many parts of your life.
It is a great transformation technique,
Coming from Chief Transformation Officer of Mediacom, we described what a title that is. So fascinating. And do you think, what's your advice for someone who's, this is new to them, I think, let me give it a go. Where do you start?
Well, there weren't any apps when I was doing it, and I'm a little bit, do you want appy things when you're emptying your mind? So literally all I would do is find a safe space, carve out 10 minutes. It only has to be 10 minutes. You can set a timer. And
when in the day is there best
time?
Well,
I do it first thing, but I don't think it matters. I just think the point is, so for me, I just started at that point getting up earlier so that I could fit it in before the day kind of started. But you can do it whatever. I think the important thing is for it to be a regular time that you won't miss. And I personally don't think you should do it in bed, because that's the same as being asleep. That's not quite it. So if you've got space to go somewhere private. But I've been known to do it in a bathroom, because that was the only kind of private space. And I have a candle that I light to make it a bit ritualistic, and then I just try and feel safe and not think about anything. And there's a nice technique which my husband talks about, which is that if a thought does come along, just think of it as put it in a little bubble and just puff it away, and then just going back to, and some people use mantras, don't they? I think there's something about, I'm in a safe space, I'm accepted, and it doesn't mean that everything in your life is going to be all right. It's not that. It's not everything's going to be okay. It's in that 10 minutes, can you allow yourself to feel safe and relax? And I think for people who are very stressed, as you say, it's got transformation capabilities. And I have been doing it for nearly 25 years, and it's been very useful. It would have been really useful if I'd learnt it at school. And I think that would be a great thing if they introduce those techniques. And I think some schools do now, but if they introduce those techniques for teenagers.
I agree with that.
I'd love that. I have two daughters as well, 5 or almost 5 and 1 and a bit.
Yeah.
And for my 5 or 4-year-old, I'd love to see her kind of gain that perspective, take that time to step back a little bit.
Yeah.
What an exciting world that would be if all children were learning meditation at school. Very interesting. So you 6 years later, you're promoted to CSO after getting head of strategy role.
Yeah.
Now in a company, there's often not many C-level roles, right? How did that come about? How did you?
So we've got quite a lot of chiefs at Mediacom at the moment, actually, but we're a big company, so that I guess it's understandable. But the Chief Transformation Officer, I think, was the first one we had in the UK. And it was when my boss, Nick Lawson, became CEO of the UK agency, and he appointed a colleague of mine, Jane, as managing director. And he said to me, what I want you to do, because I'd been head of planning, so what I want you to do is I want you to spend a lot of your time focusing on strategy for the company, not just our client strategy. And he wanted to make me part of his very small, actually, ExCo, because it was just us and the finance director, chief financial officer at the time. And so
What did you think about that when he said that?
I thought, brilliant. But then I think I'd follow Nick anywhere. It's but we talked about what we should call me quite a lot.
What were
And
what were the ideas going around?
I'm not sure. I actually can't remember, but I
Mm.
know that in the end, what I did was I drew something, and these are Jungian symbols as well, actually. But um,
And
I
Jungian, you mean Carl Jung?
Carl Jung, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Not to disrespect Freud or any other
Mm-hmm.
therapist, but the Jungian symbol for continuous improvement is sort of an arrow gradually going up, and that's also his symbol for masculinity. And then the Jung and let me just say that masculinity and femininity are a spectrum. So we all have masculine traits and feminine traits, but we have them in different proportions depending on personality. So I'm not saying men and women, I'm saying masculinity and femininity. So the symbol for masculinity is sort of an arrow kind of going upwards, continuous improvement. And his symbol for femininity is a spiral. And it's much messier. And I said, do you know what? I think one of the ways that we could define these two roles reporting into you, Nick, so me and Jane, is that Jane, as managing director, is responsible for the continuous improvement incrementally of the agency, as in, let's, improve, fees or efficiency or whatever. And my role as chief strategy officer is to disrupt the smooth running of the agency in order to create a step change that you kind of go from your arrow to going up like that. And that's how. And then that's we arrived at that title and those roles. And I think when I became Chief Transformation Officer, it was in part to continue that and also to represent that for our clients, because the Chief Strategy role had become more of a role of looking at client strategy again.
I see. So that would be the difference, just to simplify, it would be Chief Strategy Officer is focusing on the clients and Chief Transformation is focused on your actual company.
On the business, but also on our transformations that clients might need to consider and to think about as well. But that would incorporate ways of working, use of data.
So when did that, so if I'm listening now and I'm, in a head of role and I'd love to get to C-suite, at what point does that start to get yourself in a position to put yourself in the best position to get to a CSO role or Chief Transformation Officer?
So I'm going to talk about the work again.
Yeah.
I once went to a NAB speed mentoring evening, and I arrived at this evening and sort of realised that I was probably the most introverted person there, because at no point in my career coming up through the business would I have even considered on going to a speed mentoring evening, because how terrifying, right? And then I was finding myself as the mentor. And at the end of the evening, which was fine, it was very nice to me. At the end of the evening, somebody said, can you, everybody in the audience, can anybody name some advice that they've heard that they thought was interesting? And they said, yes, Sue said something. Somebody said, Sue said something. She said, mentoring. She said, it's all well and good, but I wouldn't bother with, mingling and networking. She said, I wouldn't really bother with it, really. I'd rather, you're better off at the agency concentrating on how to make the work better and make the work different. And I realised that at a speed networking evening, I had basically told everybody not to network. No, I'm sure everybody ignored me. But for me, that's the start and the end of it. There is so much potential to improve things. Things are changing so fast. You in your head of role you'll know that. And the question is how can you drive innovation, create something new that can diversify revenue streams, that can make your agency clients, more satisfied, that can help win you business in whatever sector you're sitting at. That for me is that's all I ever focused on.
Could you give us an example of how you did that? For people listening thinking, okay, sounds great. I actually don't like networking. I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
Cool. I can still make it without going to these networking events. Give us an example of what you've done.
So Direct Line was probably the first big blue chip account that we won as the media business. And I worked.
How much money was that?
It was £5 million.
£5 million. When is this roughly?
In the mid-90s.
Okay. Wow.
94.
Inflation
93,
would say that could be close to 20 now, maybe.
Well, I mean, and now it's Direct Line Group, so they spend and some great new ads just gone out. And I was working. We'd won the account. It's great, and I was working with their consultant, a man called Mike Yershin, who's very well respected in the industry. And I kept coming up with these ideas for strategy. So I would say, I don't think you should have the ad campaigns in a burst, the media in a burst. I don't think you should just run, a campaign for 4 weeks. I think we should be always on throughout the year. And I think if we're always on throughout the year at a lower weight of ratings, then that will be better, because we don't know, there's not a massive seasonality to insurance. We don't know when you're going to take out your insurance. And that's when you're most interested in it. And Mike kept saying to me about all of these ideas, it's interesting idea, Sue, interesting idea, prove it.
And who's Mike?
Mike Yershin was the consultant.
Yeah.
So he'd go, prove it. And I thought, well, but here's the logic. And he'd go, okay, but prove it. And out of this, I just sort of thought, well, there's got to be a way of proving it. And so I got together with our then head of research, who again still works for the company, Jeremy Griffiths, and I said to him, Jez, there's got to be a way we can prove it. And he went away and he came back and we talked, and then we invested in econometrics. And so we set up an econometrics division for the agency, which started as a way of answering Mike's prove it questions.
And what is econometrics?
Econometrics is regression analysis of data, which seeks to establish the relationship between media investment and growth and all other factors that might be out there.
How would you explain that to a 5-year-old?
I would say the most important way to sell ice cream is to make sure that you are in the right place and that it's a sunny day, but the advertising, a particular sort of advertising on television, can also help make you choose that particular lolly. And what econometrics analysis does is it works out which is more important than the other.
Cool. That was amazing.
Great explanation.
That was amazing.
Love that.
I love analogies, and that was awesome.
I don't know if you've seen the thread on Reddit, which is called "Explain Like I'm 5," and people will post questions they just want a very watered down answer to that helps explain it. So that was very, very good on the spot. And
Jeremy still runs, it's now systems intelligence, with some other colleagues, Paddy, Joan Christian in the UK, Claire, and but that came out of, and it became a diversified revenue stream, but it came out of, we didn't have an answer to the question. So what questions are there that could be answered in a different way? What are other companies doing, both within your sector but outside your sector, in order to answer those questions?
And were you Chief Strategy Officer before Chief Transformation Officer?
Yes.
Okay.
Why did you make the move?
I think that I'd been Chief Strategy Officer for a while, and I had
11 years, it says,
2 brilliant people working for me who were ready to take on that role. And transformation was becoming almost like a specialist subject for ourselves and for our clients. And it was, again, we sort of created the role, me and my then CEO, Josh Krzyzewski.
So you're co-author of 3 books. First one was 2012. Lots of people would love to write a book. How did you get started?
Okay. We had a book club for our clients. So you know how everybody thinks that there's like a million marketing books out there, and how do you know which ones to read and which ones to read? So we started this initiative, which we still run, which is we'll read the books and then we'll bring a couple of them to you and go, these are brilliant ones to read out of all the ones that have just been published. And it's about 2010, and the book that we'd picked was called Branding Only Works on Cattle by an American writer called Jonathan Salem Baskin. Great title. I mean, I just love the title.
Yeah, it's great.
And it was about the fact that, branding is great, but you've got to have everything else in place as well. You can't just sell the sizzle, not the steak. And I invited him to come and give a talk to our clients, and he did. And then he asked me what I did, and I told him, and I showed him some of the work that we were very proud of, and actually how we'd shifted strategically from one thing to another, and that had had great impact. And he said, I think there's a book in this, Sue. And would you write it with me? And I said, yeah, okay. Had no idea what I was taking on. And then top tip for anyone who is thinking about writing a book and can't make themselves do it, find yourself a co-author. We got a contract very fast, actually, with Bella Books in Dallas. We then had deadlines to meet, and we carved up the chapters and the case studies. And John is such a prolific writer that if I didn't keep my deadlines, he would write my bit for me, and I couldn't have that because I had things that I wanted to say. And so that would be my top tip, is that keeps you kind of honest about your deadlines.
Because how did you find the inspiration and motivation to write it while you're still working?
Well, I always do my writing in my own time. And I don't think you're going to like the answer to this, but I don't really have much of a social life.
That's one way to stay motivated.
So I generally do my writing, one evening a week, one afternoon at a weekend. And I guess if you're always out, then you're not doing that. But also I love doing it.
And how did you sell copies? Someone wants to write a book. What's the process to getting it out there and into the hands of people?
So my 3 books, I've had great publishers for all 3 of them. So Bella Books in America, Profile Books for The Glass Wall, and Bloomsbury for the current book out now, Belonging. Paperback out on May the 12th. Oh, please show it to the camera.
Hashtag shameless plug.
Yeah. And so for me, the key was to find a publisher. As I said, the first book contract came, Jonathan already had a book agent. The first book contract came so easily that I thought, oh, this is easy. I just thought that was how things went. Profile didn't work in that way. We had a book agent. He kind of sacked us after a year. We then, about a week later...
Why did he sack you?
Because he didn't think he could do any more for us.
Okay.
And I just think nothing much had been happening. And so I then just asked everybody I know, do you know anyone who knows anybody at a publisher who might be interested in The Glass Wall? It wasn't called that at the time. And in fact, I can tell you the code name for it, which was, because it was always going to be a book about gender. And our working title for The Glass Wall, which the publishers declined because they said people wouldn't want to pick it up in W.H. Smith, was No Penis, No Problem. But
what book is this?
The Glass Wall: Success Strategies for Women at Work and Businesses That Mean Business. And we believe really passionately in that. And we met an amazing woman who's now our book agent, Claire Grist Taylor, who was then editor, which she still freelance does, at Profile Books. And so they picked that up. And so they took care of the distribution of it. I mean, I think any author and any first-time author, work your contacts. This is where the networking is important. So if you've got any contacts, you have to work them yourself.
To do what?
So if you know anyone that knows anyone who might review the book or cover the book, if you know anyone who, has got a podcast, who might flash the book up at the podcast, it's those things.
There's a great piece in here. So from your book, Belonging, without the involvement of everybody in the workplace, diversity initiatives will not succeed. We need everyone to understand and implement strategies for belonging. That is the mission of this book. And later in the paragraph, it says, if the men currently in power are brought on board, diversity initiatives will have more chance of actually succeeding. White men who feel excluded need to understand how they will benefit from more diverse cultures and how they can become champions of new ways of working. What's the thinking behind that?
So over £6 billion is spent every year on diversity and inclusion initiatives, and has been at least since 2014 when we were writing The Glass Wall. And yet the statistics in terms of who's running the country, who's running boards, who's running business worldwide have not shifted sufficiently either for women or for many other underrepresented groups in senior management. And so the question then becomes, why is that? And we think there's two things. You can sum them both up under the title of diversity fatigue. One of them is that the underrepresented groups themselves are tired of yet another initiative that requires them to go on stage and be a poster person for whatever they're supposed to represent, when actually they're just trying to get on with their job, and people are tired of that when things don't change. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that there are many men that we spoke to who are in positions of power who feel as though they are themselves at risk and that their careers are at risk and they're targeted. And for that reason, although they might be, pro diversity initiatives, they're worried about doing or saying the wrong thing. And so we need to unlock a situation whereby everybody is a champion of belonging and inclusion and diversity, or things will not change. And obviously, it's a whole book, so we go into lots of techniques for that. But for anybody who wants to make a better world of work, you're the person who has to do it. You can't wait for other people to change things.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.